Welcome to the American Small Business League podcast. I am Bruce Torres, and with me is Jimmy Skovgard, a Republican running for the U.S. Senate in Wyoming. Before I read a little bit about you, Jimmy, how are you today?
Good, Bruce. We got a nice crisp morning. Wind's going not quite sideways here in Wyoming, but living in Casper, it's like one of the windy spots in Wyoming, but I enjoy living here.
Well, nice. And you're running for the Senate. You are a fifth generation Wyomingite, husband, father, veteran. Jimmy served 12 years in the Wyoming Army National Guard, was honorably discharged as a captain, worked in the private sector, has run his own business, and his life is grounded in Wyoming values. So please, first about you and why you're running. Real basic.
Well, Bruce, I was sitting on my couch complaining about politics last year. And so I said, well, I better do something. So I started posting on Facebook and some other things, and that seemed like shouting into the noise. And somebody responded once and said, hey, maybe you should run for office. So I said, okay, that sounds like a good idea. That'll get the message out there. And so I decided to run for office in September of 2024. I actually registered in April of 2025 to run for Senate in 2026, and it got an early start. And I'm glad I did because there's a little bit of detail that goes on for running for office. If you've never tried before, I was like, wow, this is a little bit, different. And of course, I'm outside of the any established political organization, and some of the first messages I got about my campaign were, you have to toe the line to get any type of support from the Republican National Committee. And I'm like, well, I don't even know those guys, so I don't really think I need any support. And I decided on a grassroots campaign. I'm like, you know, if they have all the money or my opponents have all the money, then I just need all the volunteers. And so that's how I've approached this campaign of like I'll approach it through word of mouth and getting to visit with other folks and make that a part of the process. I think that's a better way to do it.
How do you answer the question, why you? What qualifies you in your estimation? What do we need to know about you for Wyomingites to say, he's my guy. I'm voting for Jimmy.
Yeah. For me, it's about responsibility, integrity, character. When you say something, you do it. You don't say, you don't tell mistruths to people. You don't lie to your constituency. My business was cleaning up messes in the oil field. And so I'm like, well, maybe I can start cleaning up messes in Congress. And one of the first messes that I see is that we've got folks in there for ever. John Barrasso's looking at running 18 years now as a senator. And I'm like, well, that's plenty of time to get some stuff done, but he won't take a stance on, well, maybe he takes a stance. I don't know. It appears to me that my representatives are um, I think Barrasso said it the best. I stand behind Donald Trump. And when I heard that, I'm like, huh, I think a representative from Wyoming should stand behind Wyoming and Wyoming values.
Representative, you mean he's the senator, right?
Yeah, he's a senator, representative, legislator, senators. If you're going to say I stand behind something, why don't you stand behind the constituency that you represent, which are, the citizens of Wyoming. So that was my first tier, my first platform in my campaign was to fight for term limits so that we can get some new blood representing us, some new ideas, some excitement, some people that aren't afraid to take a stand and stand up for what they believe is right. Stand up for the oath that they took. If you swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution, like every service member does, including National Guard members like myself, then you need to stand behind that oath. I'm not running against Barrasso, I'm running against Cynthia Loomis in this cycle, but Barrasso keeps appearing in my radar for some reason. You know,
Well,
like
Loomis, in this, when you say the cycle, do you mean before the primary, up to the primary?
the primary, this election cycle, 2026, Cynthia Loomis is standing for re-election. So that's the incumbent that I'm running against.
Yeah.
But I look at it, I kind of lump them both together because, I'm trying to find them, are they do they stand for integrity? Do they stand for, do they stand behind character, or do they stand behind Donald Trump? And we really don't have any tools to gauge public, input. And so I'm like, well, why don't we have a tool to gauge what the public wants to do? And so I'm building one. I'm building one on a platform. I've got a 501c3, a non-for-profit that I'm building that's going to integrate, public responses, and it's under construction. I've been working on it, so folks can weigh in. If there's I'm calling them hot button topics. Hot button topics like impeachment would be a hot button topic, I would think,
Mm.
and you'd want to know where your constituency lies because you're there as a representative or a senator, legislator. You're there to represent your constituency. And if you can't gauge what your constituency wants, then how do you represent them?
Mm.
You go, oh, well, I personally represent the entire state of Wyoming. My viewpoint represents the entire state of Wyoming. I don't think so. I think you need to go out there and you need to gauge that. And we have the technology to do it. We just don't have the willpower, Bruce. We just don't have the willpower. Somebody that needs to do it.
Mm.
And, if it takes me to do it, I'll do it. I'll throw take a shot at it. And we've got some interesting tools, today. We really do. We can take the big beautiful bill, for example, and sick, chat GPT on it and say, what's in there?
Mm.
Is there anything in there about public land sales? Why, yes, there is, Jim. There's a section on public land sales. Oh, really? 5% of the public lands are up for sale. Oh, okay. Well, that's nice to know. All of a sudden, there's a big to do about that, and that got resolved. And I think the senator who proposed that section was from Utah. He withdrew that section of that budget bill, which is good, that we see that kind of stuff. And the tool that I'm suggesting, Bruce, is a way to aggregate the voice of the community. And I'm designing one that works on the county level. So you're a registered voter in say Natrona County, where I'm from, and you want to weigh in on a topic, whether it's all the way to the federal level or all the way down to the county commissioners or the city council, you can
Mhm.
weigh in. Then at the end of the day, I hope to be able to take those aggregated voices and show the users of that tool
Right.
whether or not their representatives are responsive to them. I'm working on it now, and it's up and running. It's just under construction, and it's
Thank
at
you.
it's at thisisus.org, and my campaign website that's at Skovgard2026.org.
Talk to me about your other major issues when you say what are the top, three, five, seven things that you're telling Wyomingites that you will work on when you get to the Senate.
Whenever we see the government reaching into our lives and meddling with, say state things, I think that's if it can be done at the state level, then let's do it at the state level. If it can be done at the county level, let's do it at the county level. If it can be done at the city level, let's do it at the city level. We don't need Congress. We don't need Washington reaching all the way into Casper, Wyoming, and telling us, we've got to do this and we've got to do that. Actually, it should be the other way around. If we can't get it done here in Casper, then we need to reach up and say, hey, we need a little help, state, or hey, maybe from the state we need to say, hey, feds, we need a little help here. But until that happens, we need to kind of back off. It's not one size fits all either. We're all a little different. We live here in Wyoming. We live a little differently than they say they do up in say New Jersey, for example. You might not live the same in New Jersey as you do in Wyoming. And maybe a little Department of the Interior overreach into say trails. We like to maybe get out and ride our four-wheelers around and ride a snowmobile. But when, somebody in Washington in the Department of the Interior says, no, we can't allow that anymore because you might disturb, I don't know, mating wolf packs or something like that. Whatever their reasoning is it's overreach. That's federal overreach into a local type of an issue. I know those are public lands, but we shouldn't shut the access off to public lands because we're worried about whatever we're worried about. If we're going to worry about it, then we need to approach the public that's going to be impacted by it and get their viewpoints too. You know,
Yeah.
you can't just slam something on somebody and hope that it doesn't, upset them because basically that's what's happening.
Would you flesh out for me your work and career and experiences and accomplishments in a little more detail so I have a better sense of okay, in your adulthood, these are the primary, talent, skills, accomplishments. Share some of those with me, please.
Sure. I went to the University of Wyoming where I studied math and science and physics and computer science. So I said, well, I better go for my fallback, which is history. Now I'm like, oh, this is why we study history, so we can avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. After graduating from the University of Wyoming, I joined. I was commissioned as second lieutenant in the Army National Guard through ROTC, where I served 12 years. I swore that oath, and that meant something to me. I'm to support and defend the Constitution. And so I was a second lieutenant. I worked for an environmental consulting firm for a while, so I got to clean up some messes and see what was going on. That was during the era of the clean water era. That was where it kind of started. We had folks getting sick from, pollution in the groundwater. You'd pollute the groundwater upstream from somebody, it flows down through the ground slowly and then infiltrates water wells and things like that, and people get sick. So I started working in that field as a data analyst, and this is kind of where I get some of my computer skills, that in school. As a consultant there, I learned that you really want to run your own business. If you want to get ahead in life, you want to be own your own business. So I started a small business called Anchor Environmental Services, cleaning up after other folks' messes, go clean up, make sure that the waste was handled appropriately and disposed of appropriately in the right places. And that seemed to work out pretty good for me for about 15 years. I did that. And then I shut the business down around 2016, 2017. There was a downturn in the oil field service. I thought it was a good time to get out. So I'm out now. And I kind of find myself a little bit of time on my hand. And of course, talking to myself on the couch is not the way to handle that. So I'm like, well, let's do something. Let's do something different. Let's offer the folks in Wyoming a different choice. Somebody from, that's not backed by billions of dollars and really doesn't care about dollars, to be honest. I mean, money's nice, but I think a message is just as nice. And I think volunteers are worth more than any campaign contributions are, you know.
I'm thrilled you have been a small business owner. One last question before we talk about small business issues, the reasons that we reached out to you as a candidate. On your site, Skovgard 2026.org, what's the most favorite thing you like to steer people to go look at there?
I think if you're, of course, I'm always shooting for volunteers, so I'm going to check out that volunteer page, and I'd like to know what I like to think that everybody has something to contribute, and so I like to kind of get someone's message, a volunteer's message, and then integrate it with my own message, and then shoot it back to them and say, this is how we mesh as a
Nice,
volunteer. This is how you can help this campaign, and this is how this campaign can help you. And so,
nice.
yeah, that's what I would like to see.
Well, nice. Well, as you know, Jimmy, we are reaching out to candidates such as yourself to teach them a couple of giant things. Number one is our mission, the American Small Business League, ASBL.com, is to expose the fact that small business contracts, federal contracts, typically go to the 1/10 of 1% of businesses that are big businesses, which deprives job creation, it deprives the economy from booming, and it's really a scandal and an outrage that the SBA basically facilitates this con job. Year after year, they say, we met the goal. 23% of all federal contracts have gone to small businesses. How about a loan? And we found for decades, so have congressional investigations, the SBA's inspector general. No, billions every year go to big businesses and they don't create new jobs. They're already big. So that's the mission of the ASBL. I want your thoughts about that. But also, our don'tcheatwomen.com project, which simply wants to Congress to raise from 5% to 15% the federal contracts that must go to women-owned small businesses for many reasons, not least of which women are half the population. They own 40% of all businesses in America. They sell what the government buys. Why is it okay for them to get only 5%? Newsflash, they don't ever really get that at all. More likely, every year they get less than 1% of federal contracts. And what would be so good is not only the job creation when small businesses get those contracts, but it's what it would do for women. They earn and save less than men. That allows men to do a number of things. Number one, it would primarily have much more political power. Men donate more to politicians, so they have more influence at that level, but they also run for and win office more than women. 75% of all seats in the House, the Senate, every state legislature, every president's cabinet held by men. Almost that many governor chairs and 90% of committee chair and party leadership positions held by men. And women have different political values, wisdom, experience, priorities. They will be political equals when they are more economic equals. And something like steering a fairer share of the federal contracts to women owned small businesses will go a long way toward that. We have not met anyone who's ever said, no, I think it's great that 95% or more of federal contracts go to companies owned by men. So we offer it to you to consider, dig down, confirm, talk to me about it, and road test it. Try it out in Wyoming and see, wow, does this make sense? Is this resonating? Well, Jimmy, will it help you win? That's, the bottom line. And, be in touch with us and stay in touch with us about that. What are your thoughts about those particular small business issues?
Bruce, I ran a small business, for a good chunk of my life, and even in college, I did some federal contracting, so I'm aware of some of the hurdles that the government tosses up there. I got familiar with contracting officers and that kind of stuff, and I was like, well, that's not something I want to pursue. After doing it for about 3 years, I said, yeah, no thanks.
Tell me
The-
why.
and-
What did you bump up against, or what did you realize was just too odious about it?
Well, the contracting process, it wasn't that bad, but I felt, and I was in a timber sale improvement, so let's grab a chainsaw and go and hack down little trees and over a plot of ground, and then they come up and inspect it and say, okay, yeah, this meets it, or you didn't meet it, or whatever. And so it wasn't all that intense, but what I got out of the deal is it wasn't a kind of a firm and fixed ground that I was walking on. I got into a contract that it was a timber sale improvement contract, but it had a patch of old growth timber on it that they wanted removed. And I had to, part of the contract was to cut and limb and lop and whatever, work on it. So I'm like, okay, well, I know where the log mill is. I'll just hire me a truck and drag these logs out and load them onto the truck and sell them at the mill, a little extra money. And I talked to the contracting officer and he's like, yep, that's the intent here. We want you to salvage that lumber and take it. So I got through the contract, had the stuff all down and it was time to bring what's called a log skidder up there and pull the timber out. So I get ready to hire the guy to come do that. And the contracting officer shows up and says, oh, you can't do that. I said, well, what do you mean I can't do that? Well, you can't pull the logs out. I said, well, how am I supposed to salvage the lumber and take them down to the mill if I can't pull them out? I mean, I thought that was kind of a given in a contract like that. And he's like, no, we haven't done a cultural resource survey. And I said, what part of my contract says anything about a cultural resource survey? And why is that impacting me now. So, well, this impacts you because you can't move mechanized equipment through this plot of ground because we haven't done a cultural resource survey. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. So anyway, needless to say, that lumber just laid there on the ground and rotted away. And that kind of soured me to the whole federal process. I'm like, you can just invent things in the middle of a contract, and if you're not a big business or anything like me, I'm not going to go file a lawsuit and try to change history or something.
Well, Jimmy, did they pay you any portion of that contract?
Oh yeah, that we had like $75 an acre to do the lopping and thinning of it.
So at the end of the day, basically what they did was they pulled out before completion of the contract, so you didn't do the work, you didn't get the rest of what they should have paid you, but you didn't go, did you go out of pocket or did how did it hurt you?
I'm out of pocket my time and expenses of cutting and slashing those trees and not being able to salvage them.
Well, thank you. And that's, frustrating and angering enough. And I'm a curious guy. I like people's stories and I like to learn like, well, what were the ins and outs of that? But to bring us back to the two major things that I submit to you to consider campaigning on is you tell me what's more possibly enticing, the particular of, hey, let's get more federal contracts to women and see if that brings together not only the genders, but also Republicans and Democrats left and right, because that sounds like a nonpartisan thing to me. Or is it we like that as our foot in the door to teach people about the federal contracts that are not going to small businesses that are supposed to? Talk to me about all those things, please.
All right, Bruce. If I had to take a stance on small business and the federal government, you could be guaranteed that I would look at eliminating some of that red tape. Let's face it. We don't need this piece of legislation and that piece of reporting and this. Once somebody qualifies as a small business, they should be good for 2 or 3 years, and they should have the requirement. If that changes, if perhaps you're no longer a small business, you should probably have the ability to go in there and let us know. Because if you're not going to let us know, then we're going to find out eventually, and then we're going to have to come back and maybe take back something we got from you. But otherwise, no. No. We don't need all the rules and the regulations and things. We need something streamlined. You a small business? Yeah, okay. Show me. Okay. Send me a copy of your bank statement. Fine. Okay, you're good. Now, 3 years later, maybe I want to check in again. 5 years later, maybe I want to check in again. In the 15 years that I was a small business, I didn't change from a small business to a big business. I'm kind of doubting that most of the small businesses change from small business to big business, so they're not changing that much. And we don't need to revisit them every year and say, "Oh, are you still a small business?" and file this and file that. No, that creates a barrier to contracting with the federal government. We need to eliminate that. Encourage folks. I think the government benefits from the diverse, I don't know, aspects that small businesses bring to the economy. And like your website says, why not invest that money locally? Instead of pulling that money away from that community. If it can be done locally, let the community benefit from that. The folks that are right there working for that small business benefit, that small business benefits, the
Mm.
whole economy benefits.
And that's why we think that, Wyoming would, will vote for you if you did stand for the idea that the contracts that are supposed to go to small businesses go to actual small businesses. So that would mean that would need a house cleaning at the SBA because every year they say those contracts went to small businesses, but each federal agency has a lot of leeway in saying, well, because it's this industry or this service, we can award this quote unquote small business contract to this company over here that has 2,000 employees. It's worth $75 million and they have a lock on it. It's the corporate capture of that process, like so much of the functioning of the federal government, state governments, et cetera, are really captured by enormous banking and corporate interests. So it's an inspiring and appealing, and it's a revelation. This information is not it's not out there mainstream. We've been working for decades to uh, teach and explain, look, and when people look at it and they say, wow, this is really this is an outrage. And it really boils down to small businesses would create millions of new jobs every year if they got just 23% of the federal contracts. When the women goal gets raised, that would be an extra 10%. And if 33% of all federal contracts went to legitimate small businesses, that would be around $264 billion of business poured into legitimate small businesses. They would create around 3 million new jobs to do that work. And that's on top of the 2 million jobs that America typically creates. In other words, it would be the economic stimulus that the 1953 Small Business Act intended when it said a fair portion at the time of federal contracts must go to small businesses. And over the decades, it's become codified as 23%. So this is all, it takes a deeper dive. Want you ask you, request you, challenge you, Jimmy, to get convinced about it enough to experiment, bringing it to your speeches and your material, and see if it helps tilt the scale in your favor, so that you win next year. In our final moments here, what would you reiterate? What would you say that we haven't discussed yet? Please tell me.
I would say that everybody is needs to accept their responsibility for where we're at right now. So you can't just use the terminology, it's they, it's their fault, it's them, it's the Republicans, it's the Democrats. That's an incorrect mindset in my mind. I think it's us. We hold the responsibility in our republic, we the citizens. So as we, get ready to end here, Bruce, I'd like to reiterate that it's the responsibility belongs to us. And are we willing to accept it? And two, are we willing to do something about it?
That is huge, and in fact, that's probably the bullseye of uh, the reasons why we are where we're at. And when enough people accept that challenge, and that is the American challenge, we can, and I do believe we have to remind each other, like, we can solve our problems, because after all, they are our problems. And you just described exactly how government is supposed to work in a democratic republic like ours. And again, your site is skovgard2026.org. I encourage everybody to go there, learn more about the things we've discussed, and a lot of things we didn't get a chance to, we didn't get to. I want to thank you very much, Jimmy, for your time, and I want to thank everybody for watching and listening today.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.